Welcome back to the grind, everybody. Man, we are going strong. This has just been so much fun. Look forward to this every week. Welcome back, Martin.
Hey, thanks. I'm excited too. So super awesome.
Yeah. What's kind of been going on in your world? How's your week been?
Week's been good. Busy. Always stay busy obviously with work, and we have a business networking group that we do every Monday. So that's super, super cool. And tomorrow I'm going to break away a little bit and get a little golf in. So that'll be fun.
Nice. Yeah. Golf's always a lot of fun. I haven't been out in a while, so definitely something I need to start working back into my routine for sure. Speaking of routine, it kind of brings me on a topic that I actually wanted to talk about today, which was family and business. One thing that I've always kind of struggled with as far as like managing family and business is sometimes I get one-sided towards the business or work and lose sight of, actually one of our first ministries, which is our family. And so over the years, I've gotten better and better, and it's something that I'm continually still trying to work on. And, I've realized like having a family, they are priority over the business. Like, it's God, and then your wife, then your kids, and then everything else falls underneath of that. But sometimes, we get in the day-to-day, and I know there's so many people out there that go through this, and you get in the thick of the weeds, and man, I got to get this figured out. I got this going on, and got this bill coming up, and we just get caught up in. And I feel like a lot of it is like an attack from the enemy of like, here's all these things going on. Let's get you scrambled in all these different directions, and then you lose sight of where God's actually called you to minister to. So that's something that I've currently still working on of like, hey, I need to make family time as well. I need to try and shut it off by a certain time or whatever the case may be. And I just think there's so many people out there that kind of go through the same thing, and just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, and if you kind of deal with that and kind of how you handle that. Just talk about that, I guess.
Yeah, actually, that's definitely a tricky and a touchy subject because I think we all go through it. I would say I have a little bit different take on it, like a visual, and I'm going to kind of share that because again, anyone that's doing business, it's a grind. It's not easy. If it was, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
So it's about like, rolling up the sleeves and, doing everything you physically got to do to be able to, build it day by day by day by day. But the thing we have on it, like as an example, when we started, I always look at why you started it, and you'll hear me say it all the time to people. Hey, what's your why? So what was the reason why you started what you're doing? If it was strictly to, make money and have a better life, I mean, yeah, I guess you could do that. I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. So for us, we sat down and we're like, hey, this is what we're looking to accomplish. This is what we want to do. We want to literally take ground for the kingdom. We want to build generational wealth where we can literally give it to our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. We don't have those yet, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we want them to be able to be in a much different position and situation than how we are. So I think by doing that with myself and my wife, it allowed us to look at it from a different angle. Like, hey, we're co-builders in this. And when I'm grinding, she's grinding.
Right.
So we're in this together. And I think it alleviates a lot of the, hey, you don't spend time with me or you're not, whatever the case is. So I think having that perspective helps. But also with that being said, you definitely can't just neglect your wife. And I'm going to give you an example. That one time not long ago, I was golfing with a gentleman that I hold in high esteem. He's a brilliant businessman. He has multiple companies that make well over 7 figures a year. And he's a brilliant, brilliant man. And I remember he took me out. Literally, I got to golf on Trump's golf course with him. And he's a member there, and he golfs there like 4 days a week. But I remember he like driving. I don't remember the hole, but I remember he was saying, "Hey, Mark, I want to give you a little advice." And I said, "Yeah, for sure. Soak it up, give it to me." And he basically said, with my wife, 1 week out of the month, I don't work. So we fly. We're at a different country. We're doing whatever. Now, mind you, we all aren't in that type of position where we could just take a week off and go fly to another country. But his point was well taken. It was, listen, you got to prioritize and you got to get away. Even if it's a day, even if it's a weekend, even if it's a couple of days during the week, every single month, you got to make that time. You got to get away. You got to take it away. And then on top of that, on top of getting all this advice from him, he was like, hey, sometimes my best ideas have come when I was away, not even thinking about business. So he said, you got to do that. And, I felt like the Lord spoke through him in that situation where, even though my wife and I are on the same page and we're building something together, we're still in the flesh. You know what I mean? So I think it's super, super important to make sure that you are breaking away and spending some of that one-on-one time with your wife.
Yeah, for sure. I got a lot of stuff kind of going through my head on all of that because I 100% agree. I mean, last week I was talking about, sometimes there's days where you have to put in 18 hours a day. It's just the reality of, running a business. It's not like, oh, I'm only going to work 3 days today. There might be days where you do that, but there are going to be days where it's 18 hours a day. And I think one thing I've really been learning too, I've been watching a lot of like Dan Martell and just being more intentional with time, like you can still produce a lot if you structure your time correctly. Yeah. And so I've just been taking a deep look into my calendar and prioritizing certain tasks throughout the day, even if it's checking emails, if it's checking whatever the case may be, putting it into the calendar to be intentional with that time. And like, he even makes intentional time with his family. Like on Tuesdays, we're going to do this, on Thursdays, and I was like, man, you get so stuck in the weeds that you like, man, it's so simple, but it like makes so much sense. Like just being intentional with your time.
Yeah.
If you do want to take a trip once a month, plan for that. Okay, I'm going to be hustling for the 3 weeks out of the 4 that we have. And I think that's kind of where the communication comes in too with your wife of like, hey, I'm going to be grinding for the next 3 weeks so we can have this 1 week.
Yeah.
And so that might mean 18-hour days. It might mean 12-hour days. Whatever the case may be, but I'm going to have to put in this time so we can have that time. Right. Yeah. So, I just think being intentional with your time, and how you spend it, because a business isn't going to run by itself. Like you have to put in the time. And I think that's the misconception that people have sometimes when they're starting a business is like, oh man, I got all this time now. It's like, if you were looking to work less than a 9 to 5, you probably shouldn't have gotten into business. And that's just the reality of it. Cause to me, and what I've found and what I've listened to some of the top entrepreneurs is like, it's going to take a lot more work than a 9 to 5 is going to take. So,
I think I would probably 2 things on that, which is irony, because I got an email today from Dan, and it was a product that he was selling, and I love his stuff, and I think it's great to obviously have great mentors. But it reminded me of actually one of my mentors and Tom, if you're watching this, about you. I remember he used to mentor me every single Monday. And he was a gentleman that used to make $50 million a year. Brilliant man. Probably one of the most brilliant business-minded men I've ever met. But I'll never forget one day he said, Martin, everything I do is in my calendar. He says, even my dates with my wife are in my calendar. If it's not in my calendar, I don't do it. And I said, are you serious? He pulled his calendar out. He literally showed me from his phone. And he showed me even his scheduled dates with his wife. It was all on his calendar. And you can look at it like, maybe that's obsessive or whatever the case is, but he had a rule that it was on his calendar, and if it wasn't on his calendar, he was not doing it. And I think it not only allowed him to be uber intentional, but allowed him not to ever be stuck in the weeds.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that. I appreciated that piece. And as far as I know sometimes dealing with people are like, well, why would I want to work? I work, 8 hours a day. Why do I want to work? I get that whole concept. People do that. The difference is what you're working for. Mm-hmm. Right. One is working for just your day to day. You're working for, and I'm not meaning to offend. I'm just calling it how it is, right? You're working for your day to day. You're putting food on the table and you're doing that. You know what I mean? Normally when you're an entrepreneur, you're just thinking differently and you're thinking bigger. And I'm not saying like, I'm not trying to be above or whatever the case is, but my wife and I have come to the point where, we are in alignment where we want to build something that's so big that it doesn't stop, and it goes on from generation to generation to generation. And I believe it's biblical God's called us to leave an inheritance,
Yeah.
not just to our children, but our children's children. So it's about more than just us. And that's why if we have to do an 18-hour day, it's okay.
Yeah.
Because the goal is this and not just this.
Yeah. And I think that's one area where Crystal and I are blessed as well, is like we do work together.
Yeah.
So we do have that blessing to where maybe some people don't have that, blessing to be able to work with their spouse or whatever. So that could be a little bit more challenging as far as time goes. But I think just being intentional. And another thing he was talking about was like tasks stacking. So like, why not knock out multiple tasks while doing something, right? So like for him, if he's having to travel to, say, Houston, he's taking meetings he'll pay for the people to come on the plane with him, take meetings on the plane while he's going to an event in Houston. So he's like stacking tasks within a certain time frame. And I'm like, it's genius if you actually think about it. Yeah. And it's like, where can we look on our calendar where we can stack tasks together and get more production out of our day rather than like feeling like we went through the whole day and got nothing done.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me into my next question of like, do you believe business owners can hinder the progression of their business?
Yeah, 100%. Right. Great question. Yeah, I do. Now, if I were to put a disclaimer, I put a disclaimer that, again, business is not easy and you're going to go through and it's going to take time. And the most important piece is the development that happens on you during that time. And that's a whole nother deal, right? But there's a big piece on that because you have to be developed to be able to be that person that can handle it. It's opposite, right? Like as an example, if I say, hey, I want to be a millionaire, a lot of times people are like, I just want to be a millionaire. But the thought process you should have countercultural is, hey, I want to be that guy that made the $1 million, that guy, the knowledge in his head, what he's learned. I want to be that guy. You know what I mean? So you're focused on that and not the $1 million. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I always think of. So when you look at business, I think a lot of times we can have great intentions, but again, if we're not doing certain things, business is going to be hindered. And I don't care if we're talking somebody who is a Christian and somebody who's not a Christian. I think a lot of times, especially as Christian or as Christian business owners, we think to ourselves like, oh yeah, well, God's got us. Well, God does got you, but God laid rules down that are in place and you have to abide by those rules. Think about Jesus, right? The Son of God came down and had to live within the rules that he created. He wasn't excluded from those rules, right? So if he's not excluded from those rules, neither are we. So I think a lot of times, we have to look at that. And I'm going to give you an example from the Word.
Yeah.
So I want to say, I think it's in, test my knowledge, right? I think it's 2 Kings, right? So there's a story where you have a widow and she had 2 kids and her husband was in, like I like to say, the University of Phoenix. He was in the University of prophet school. And her husband was a godly man and he died. Now, obviously there's no money coming in. They had debt. And the way it worked back then is if you owed people money, then they could come and take your children. And then basically those kids would have to work that off. Right. So in this case, she goes to one of the prophets and she's like, hey, my husband died. He was he loved the Lord. And now the collectors are out the door and they're going to take my kids. What do I do? Now, normally you'd be like, oh, let's set up a GoFundMe and let's give you a little money and we'll raise money at the church and we'll do all this stuff. Ultimately, that's what we would do, right? Yeah. But in this case, that's not what he said. He didn't say, oh, I'm going to give you money. What was his response? What do you got in your house? And she's like, I don't have anything in my house, right? Except for, a little thing of oil. And he says, no, this is what you're going to do, right? So at that time, he's like, hey, go to your neighbors, borrow vases, as many as you can, bring them back, fill them up with oil, and then go and sell. And then here's where it gets interesting, that you may pay off your debt and live with the rest. So then she goes and she has her kids go out and they go probably to the neighbors and they probably gather up as many as they can. They came back And this is where the partnership with God is. So if she didn't do those things that she was told to do, right, those kids would have been like enslaved and had to work that off. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
So we could say, well, God would never let that happen. There's free will. So, but the bottom line is the answer was there. She just didn't see it. She needed somebody else to show her, here's what the solution is. Now she took action and she was obedient. And because of that, things worked out, right? But ultimately, we know the story that, they filled the vases with oil, and as many vases as she had, she filled the oil, then it stopped. And then then they were to go sell the oil, which are the vases with oil, which they probably sold them to the people they borrowed them from.
Yeah.
But the thing about when you look at the situation, they didn't give her money, they gave her a business, and she went out and did it. Now, there was that fine line in the sand where if she didn't do anything, this was going to be the outcome.
Right.
But because she did what she was supposed to do, it worked out for her. And I think business and anything, whether you're talking about business or you're talking about nonprofit, or it doesn't matter what you're talking about. I always say if it's not working out for you, there's a chance that you're looking at it wrong and you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I 100% believe that can happen to us because it literally happened to the widow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, it could keep your business small.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes a lot more sense. That was just something that I kind of wanted your thought process on, because I think it goes back to what we've talked about before of like, you have to move your feet in order for God to move. It's like, I think so many times, and as Christians, we can be like you said, like, oh, God's got me, God's going to move, God's going to do this. It's like, yeah, God can do all those things if you choose to follow the steps he's laid in front of you. Right?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, this might be harsh, but it's really laziness, yeah. Right? So instead of me doing what I'm supposed to do, I could just not do it and be lazy about it and say, God's going to take care of it. Now could he? Sure he could. He's God. He could do whatever he wants to do. But ultimately he created a framework that we all have to operate in. And as long as we operate within that framework and we're touching on the principles that he created, you're going to have success, which is why I call them success principles. If you're not operating in those principles, you're not going to have success. And year after year after year, you're going to be in the same spot as you always were. Nothing's going to change. It's like, as an example, that gentleman I was telling you about made $50 million a year. He's not a believer, but guess what? The principles that he puts and uses in his business are biblical. So God's not a respecter of persons, right? So it doesn't matter what you believe. If you do the framework that he created, you will have success in whatever that model is. So that's the part I really like and I get excited about. I do. But, ultimately we're all accountable, and we are. And God's like, hey, I want to partner with you, but you're not doing what it is you're supposed to do. And I'm going to give one last example on this. So if you go to Luke, I believe it's Luke 19. It's a great, which this story is a couple times, but the story where the nobleman went off to receive the kingdom. Yeah. He called 10 of his servants. He gave them all £1, and he said, do business till I come. I love this verse. And then basically he goes off, receives the kingdom, comes back, calls the servants, but he only called 3 of them, which is interesting. So it tells me, what did the 7 do? Maybe just blew the money.
Right.
But the first one he called and he said, what did you do with it? And he says, I took 1 and I turned it into 10. He 10x'd it. And what happened? The Lord said, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Because you 10x'd it, I'm going to put you over 10 cities, right? And then the second came, and the second similar said, hey, I turned 1 into 5, Lord. And he says, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Because you turned 1 into 5, I'm going to place you over 5 cities for influence. And then we know the third one didn't do anything with it. He buried it. He hid it. He made excuses. You know what I mean? And it was interesting because the Lord said, you wicked and lazy servant. Now here's where it gets a little interesting for me, because I try to dive into this. One, it teaches me that you could be a believer and still be wicked and lazy, right? And secondly, you had 2 people that truly were willing in the story. One was only able to do 10 times, and one was willing to do 5 times. Well, how can that be when they're both willing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. I believe that it's capacity, right? Yeah. One had more capacity, so he was able to earn more with what he had. But that expanding your capacity comes from you being obedient and doing those things in a proper way. So you're learning those lessons, you're learning those foundations, those success foundations, those principles, and then now you're at a capacity to be able to, take whatever you can and multiply greatly. And truthfully, as a believer, Dylan, we are called that whatever thy hand touches, we're to multiply.
Yep.
Everything.
Yeah. No, and I think this goes back to learning. I think we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but just always being willing to learn to grow your capacity. Because I think so many times we can get in this place of comfortability where we just stop learning, and it's like we know it all. And it's like the moment you start thinking that you know it all is the moment that you lost. Because I think as believers, we should always be learning. Like we're always in our word, like we're always learning the word. The same thing goes for the business. It was like, how can I create this funnel better? How can I make this website better? How can I do my marketing better? How can I make the client experience better? Like there's always things that we can be improving. And I think that's a key lesson from that story as well, of like, in order to grow that capacity, we have to be able to learn.
Yeah.
Just like learning from Dan Martell, scheduling out my days. I wasn't doing that before, but until I decided to, check in and start learning, I would have never even thought of that. So I think it's like the sense of like not knowing it all. Even us on the podcast, like we don't know it all. Like we're always learning. So just staying in this mindset of always learning.
Yeah.
That kind of brings me to a kind of tidbit that I want to share with people today, and kind of just blew my mind today when we were sitting here working and you've kind of said this previously, of like, the thing is not always the thing. Today we were going through some of our funnels and things like that. And I had come up with the story of like going and buying a car. And when my wife and I were going to go buy a car, salesmen are trying to sell us on all these bells and whistles. Oh, it's got the leather seats. It's got heated seats. It's got this. It's got that. And they listed off all these things. And then they come to me and like, how's that sound? It all sounds great, but does it have 8 seats? Nope, it's got pilot seats. So you just wasted all your time listing off all these features when at the end of the day, what I really needed was the 8 seats. So even if that means it's a little, you get a base model or a little lesser of a model because those are the ones with a bench seat in the middle, that is what I need. It's not always about all the features. And I think a lot of times as business owners, we can always be so locked into the features and like what we're offering people. And it's like, that's not what they need. Like, we got to touch their pain. Like, where are they struggling? And, like, are they struggling paycheck to paycheck? Are they living day to day? Are they homeless? Where are they? Like, what is their pain? That's where, as business owners, we have to meet them. And I think of like the salon, right? Somebody got their hair butchered at another shop. They're coming to get it fixed. That's a pain for them. Oh, I don't like the grays in my hair. They come and get it colored. That's a pain for them. Like, people buy on pain and what they're struggling with and not on features. And so I thought that was a really cool story. And I don't know if you have anything on that, but it was just something really awesome that I just put together this morning. And I don't know.
No, it was good. It is true. I don't know what the percentage is, but I know that if you took a look at it from 100% scale, I'm going to probably say 95% of people purchase based on pain compared to pleasure, right? Pain is what lasts, right? Pleasure is, I want it, but how bad do you want it? Whereas if you have pain attached to it, God forbid somebody got cancer, they had a month to live, right? They're going to do whatever they can, right? They're going to have a completely different outlook over the next 30 days than they would have before.
Yeah.
So pain always moves the needle 100%. It was interesting when you were talking about the salesman, though. I was even thinking to myself, here's a great example that somebody taught him, because he is a sales manager, and a sales manager is probably learning from the GM. So you have these lids that are passed down of like, hey, let's sell by going through all the features. And then truly what he should have did was find out like, hey, what do you need?
Yeah.
What is it that you need? What is it that you're looking for? And I try to get really, I feel like I do that well, but with that still being said, you always want to get better. But I want to, like, when I'm talking with somebody that just comes into our business, I want to know from the very beginning, no, what do you want? What are you looking to, and most of the time they're going to just give you a little bit, right?
Yep.
Well, this is what I want.
Yep.
No. We're going to stop for a second and we're going to think about this. What is the goal? Because if they're like, oh, I just want to make $100,000, well, is the goal just to make $100,000? I remember having a young guy on one time, Jimmy, I'll never forget, young kid, and I'm like, Jimmy, what's your goal? And I could see his mind just thinking like he's thinking, and I'm like, he's like, I think he said, I want to make $100,000. And first of all, I was like, okay, I'm thinking he's never made probably close to $100,000. So I said, Jimmy, I'm going to stretch you, permission to stretch you. And, he said, yeah. And I said, I want you to write down $100,000. He wrote it down, crossed it out. I want you to double it. And normally I would probably go bigger, but there's a point to this. And he wrote down, I go, what does that say? He said, $200,000. I said, well, why don't you make $200,000? And you could see him like, there's no way. Well, if you could figure out how to get to 100, you could figure out how to get to 200.
Yeah.
And if you figure out how to get to 2, you can figure out how to get to 5, right? But it's just like learning, like, what does that person want? And sometimes they don't even know by helping them get there. Now, let's say, Dylan, you were less responsible and you came in and you're like, hey, I really like this. I really like the leather seats and it's got heated seats. Man, I'm really liking that. But if I'm a good salesman, I'd be like, hey, Dylan, how many kids do you have?
Yeah. I was going to say, just real quick.
Yeah, no, go.
I say this because the first question he asked is, what is it that you're looking for? And I said a family car. His next question should have been, oh, how many kids? He never asked.
100%.
He started going into the features. It's like you missed the whole point.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to dig deeper. So
yeah,
keep going.
It's a good learning lesson because, finding out, like, let's really find out, like, what is it all about? Like, what, in your case, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? You know what I mean? And then by knowing that, now it allows me to be able to know what angle I can come from. Yeah. Same with Jimmy. Hey, let me find out. Jimmy's probably never even stopped to think about it. So then now all of a sudden I get a Jimmy where he's like, hey, I'd like to be able to make $200,000, Martin. Or I call me Coach Martin. So I tell him, hey, Jimmy, who do you have to be the guy that makes $200,000 every year? Because that's what we're going to focus on, not focus on the money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think a lot of people get that part right. Obviously, the young salesman or the car salesman that you talked to, he had that part wrong. And I think most people get it wrong. You know what I mean? Instead of like, no, let's find out like what is it that this person is trying to accomplish? What is it this person actually really needs? And even if they don't know it, let's stop and talk about that. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, no, I hear it all the time in business. And I think even when we first started the salon, it was like, you're so in the day-to-day of things that you start thinking that the business needs something that it doesn't necessarily need. And I think that's where a lot of business owners miss it, of like, oh, we need to do this. And it's like, are you sure you need to do that? Like, maybe we just need to test it and like test it for a couple of weeks, test it for a month and see if that's actually what the clients are needing. And once I started to learn to just start testing things and, putting things together and seeing what marketing worked or what kind of experiences during the client experience was working, and starting piecing things together is when I started figuring out things. But when we get so focused on like, no, this is the thing, it's like, no, it's probably, if you think it's the thing, it's probably not the thing. And I learned that the hard way as well. So that's great. How about you during the week? Has anything come up during your week, or anything come to your mind during the week that you want to share?
Yeah. So before we go to that, I want to share real quick, because I think that's gold, and I think a lot of people miss that point, right? So, you understand, every single person, you only know what you know. And if you're 100% happy with where you are, what you're doing, what you're making, the whole 9 yards, then cool. Like, just check out and you're good to go. But I'm going to tell you, there's nobody that's going to say that, right? Even people that are, way higher level. They want to be at another higher level. That's why they are where they are, right? They're not cool with average.
Yeah.
But when you made a point, there's a term that a long time ago I learned, and I use it all the time, is whatever you track and measure, you can improve. But if you don't track it or you don't measure it, how are you going to know if you need to improve it or not? So when you said that was super, super wise, because whatever you fill in the blank, right? Even if it was like losing weight, your buddy's like, oh, I'm going to do this. You're like, oh no, this works. Okay. You do it for a month. I'm going to do this for a month. Yeah. We're going to track it. We're going to measure it, and we're going to see what works better, right? Because when you start doing that, when you track it and when you measure it, you're able to make adjustments. That's why we say whatever you track and measure, you can improve. But if you don't, you can't. So when you were talking about that, man, that is a 100% requirement. So I'm going to encourage you, if there's any business owners out there right now, maybe you're a new business owner and you're not doing that, everything you do, you have to track. You have to, because otherwise you're just like imagine making a soup and you're just throwing stuff in there. And then finally you're like, oh man, it's perfect. Well, like, how do I know what was in there? How am I going to do that again? Like, how much of this was in, how much of that? Same concept. So you got to track it all. So I just wanted to share on that. I thought that was gold that you said to them. As far as for me, for the work, I love it. I love the process of being able to go in and help men and women in business, and be able to truly build something special. Like I tell our people all the time, I say this, and some of them probably don't even have children, but it doesn't matter. I don't ask them. I just say it. But I always tell them here, this is my goal. My goal is that I want them to I want to help them build a business so big that when they're done, they can pass it to their children and allow the money to keep flowing. And I'm a big believer that God's called us to leave it, like I said, an inheritance to our children's children. I think he said that for a reason. So, we all leave something to our kids, but a lot of times it never makes it to the next generation. So it needs to take truly intention to be able for that to happen. And I think obviously God knew that. That's why he phrased it that particular way. But, I look at it as it's an opportunity to be able to help people and truly change generational wealth. But on top of all that, it's an opportunity to be able to influence people for the kingdom while you're there. So when people come in, they're going to know soon that I'm a believer, and they're going to know it. And in the training, and they're going to learn principles from the Lord. And I'm going to tell them that it's a biblical principle. So they're going to learn these things. And it's having an environment now that we get to create, that we get to influence. And now go all the way back real quick. When you go to the Luke 19, where the person that had 10 was to be put over 10 cities to influence, your business is a city that you get to influence and impact everybody that's underneath you, from your clients to your employees, all the way across the board. So I just say, I love that opportunity. I want to be the guy that takes advantage. I believe that I am. And if you haven't ever thought of it that way, I want you to chew on it and start doing the same thing, because we get the opportunity to influence these people in a mighty way.
Man, that is so good. That's gold right there too. And that's literally what we've done with the salon, and we would do across any locations we have. We have a prayer wall, we have Christian music playing, we have the whole nine. We have Proverbs and stuff, Psalms at the waiting area. Mm-hmm. And it's like, sometimes I'll be sitting in the back office and people will be getting their hair washed out in the shampoo bowls. And just hearing the conversations is just amazing to hear. We'll have people come back there, man, is this a Christian business? Oh, wow, you guys have a prayer wall? Like, these things matter. Like, we can use business for God's kingdom. It's not always a nonprofit. It's not always a church. And just because you have a nonprofit doesn't mean that it's not a business. It's just a not-for-profit, but you still have to make money to operate. Right. And then just hearing people have peace, like they're like, man, it's just so peaceful in here. Like the music and just how everything is, that in itself is rewarding, that knowing that people are being touched and hearing God through the salon even. So I don't think it really is dictated by which business you're in. You can still spread the love of God and God's word through any avenue.
Yeah, I would say that I think that we're called to, right? So like, two groups that you brought up was nonprofit and church, and I trust me, I remember being on a pretty heated conversation with a gentleman once who had a nonprofit for, I want to say 15 minutes. And we kind of had this nice little back and forth battle. And basically I look at it, we have a nonprofit, but the nonprofit, for children who have been bullied and sexually abused, and host free summer camps.
Yeah.
But here's the deal: if there's no money coming in, there ain't no summer camps.
Yep.
Your nonprofit is just a tax status. You know what I mean? But ultimately, at the end of the day, God's called you to multiply everything that your hand touches. And I think, as far as a lot of times we think like we can have this mind like a lot of the stuff has to be done in the church, but I think we forget that the church is not the building. The church is you and I. The church is people. The church is you. So we are called to impact and influence in a mighty way. We're called to do that. Not in a building. No, us. So every single area we can do that in. And I want to say that I believe that the better we get and the more we learn, the more our capacity grows, like in Luke 19, right? The more of that's going to come out in everything that we do. Like, even as an example, Dylan, like in our, we have a business networking event every Monday, and we have businesses from Fallbrook all the way up to Corona, all in between that come out, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're going to start with prayer. They're going to hear the word. They're going to hear, principles from the Lord, and everybody understands that and they know that. So I love the opportunity to be able to do that, and I will never apologize for that. So,
well, so good. It was another great and awesome conversation. I look forward again to next week. I just have so much fun having these conversations, and I literally try to remember all the conversations that we have while we're working that we can bring to the podcast, because I feel like there's so much gold in the behind the scenes. Sometimes I'm like, man, maybe we should just like set up mics at our workstations, and then as soon as we start talking about something, press record and seeing how that works. But hey, if you guys think that's a great idea, let me know and we can try and work something out. But again, love and appreciate you, and just enjoy the time together. So
I love it too. Thanks, Dylan. It's been awesome.
Yes. All right, guys, until next week, we'll see you then.